And welcome. Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Many of us, as we start getting older, we find that we're starting to collect and figure out what are we doing with all of this stuff. I remember watching a movie just recently, Rocky Balboa, in which he says, it seems the older I get, the more I have to leave behind. But I thought to myself, how many of us, when we're approaching midlife, actually can say we're leaving anything anywhere besides in the garage, in the attic, in the basement? On the Beyond 50 radio program today, we're going to be exploring what all this means for us and kind of how it applies to life. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is author of the book, The Liberated Baby Boomer. She has been inspiring others to live simply for over the last 25 years, which includes writing a monthly column called Cater on the Home Front in the Annapolis Capital. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Cater Leatherman. Cater, thank you for joining us here on the program.
Hi, Daniel. My pleasure.
Now, it's an interesting subject because clutter is kind of one of those things that you hear out there where, for instance, if you tend to have a lot of clutter, stuff that you're not using, it's kind of a metaphor for what's going on not only within inside of you, but also in life.
Absolutely. Our homes reveal a lot about us. Clutter actually is, I think of it as very dense energy. It's toxic energy. And I read a quote years ago that said there's no spiritual design for clutter, but many of us end up with lots of it.
Now, how did you come to write this book? Was there something that had kind of changed for you or clicked and you said, I think this is something that's pretty necessary out there for people?
Absolutely. I grew up in a kind of a typical post-war era of the 50s and 60s where my father was climbing the corporate ladder, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and accumulating things was status for them. And I grew up, I would say, with not a lot of excess, but some excess. And then I got married and dropped out and went and lived off the land in Colorado. And that was about a 5-month period of time. Lived in a house with no running water. We had a pump at the kitchen sink, grew our own vegetables, and went into town to make phone calls. But what I found was that was a life also of deprivation. Mm-hmm. And so I had that experience, and then this experience of growing up in probably an upper middle class home. And I just realized I wanted to find that sweet space between the two. And that's when it started. And that was back in 1974 when I lived off the land.
Mm-hmm. So you were a hippie then, sort of?
I was kind of a hippie, yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, I noticed that in the book you sort of had that Jerry Garcia kind of a photograph going on there, and I kind of wondered about that.
Oh, yeah, we need to talk about Jerry,
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a whole chapter in the book about the Grateful Dead and how they actually, we can talk about it right now, they actually, what I appreciate about them is they created the space to live by their own lights. They played music for the sheer love of doing it. If you liked it, great. If you didn't, that was okay, too. Mm-hmm. And they were about attraction rather than promotion, and they allowed their fans to tape their concerts and never played the same song twice. And I don't know, I kind of liked that kind of attitude. They broke all the rules in the music business and ended up being one of the highest grossing bands of all time. There was something about that I really appreciated. They were true to themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's creating space in your life, and that is what a lot of my book is about. How can we get rid of all these old beliefs and attitudes and just clear the space to be who we are?
And that's really difficult sometimes for a lot of people. As you always hear, a lesson repeats itself until it's learned, and pretty soon you're scratching your head saying to myself, well, I thought I got this lesson, and it seems to be coming back to me in this way and in this way, and it's after a while you kind of think to yourself, when do I ever get a break? I mean, what is that moment that you cross the threshold? And I think a lot of us want life sometimes to get easier, but I think sometimes we make it harder than it needs to be.
Well, there are times when we can't get out of our own way. I think there's always another level of learning, and I think our attachment is to being finished with things, and really every ending is a new beginning. And I think it's our attachment sometimes that gets us into trouble.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kate, you talk in your book about the 5 types that tend to, I guess, hold on to things. Could you describe that for us?
In the relationship chapter, I talk about there are 5 types of people, and 3 of them are the way. I went to a lecture in Marin County, California, years ago, and the way he explained it is there's people in our lives that are, we draw a line, and there are people in our lives that are above the line, and they're the people that energize us, that appreciate us, who they're our cheerleaders in our life. And in one way or another, they make our life easier. And then there are the people that are below the line. They drain our energy. They're critical. They're negative. Very often they're our family members, so we can't get rid of them. We can't get rid of them, of course, but the key is the problem is we have too many people below that line.
Right.
And the key is to cultivate more relationships with people above the line.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. Now, here's the interesting thing when you think about it, too, is that in your book there was one particular chapter I was really interested in. It was about an African healer by the name of Deben.
Yeah, Deben. Yes.
Now, let's talk about that, because here you were going through this Q&A of basically, who are you? Tell me who you are. But then this went on for hours, and you finally began to realize that the authentic you was starting to express itself. Tell us what was going on there.
Well, it was a weekend workshop where the question of the workshop was, tell me who you are. And there were about 10 of us in the group. And we would go around and say that we were, what we did for a living and what our interests were. And he would listen, and then he would go to the next person and ask them to tell him who they were. And this went on, and then everybody had finished their tell me, and then he would go around again. And this went on for hours and hours and hours, and we were making things up and stealing each other's identities. And finally, I just got up and I started just pounding my fist on the floor and crying and kind of screaming out, I don't want to do this anymore. And there was this dead silence, and he said, that's who you are. What you're feeling in this moment is who you are. It's not about your job. It's not about how much money you make. It's not about where you live. It's what are you feeling in the moment? And that was a big eye opener for me at that time in my life.
And now, how did that kind of, I guess, change the direction from the way you were doing things before? Did you find yourself saying, boy, I've really kind of been on autopilot? As my producer had once said that she was working with someone, and she says that a lot of people tend to kind of go like zombies. They're kind of staying in their patterns. They don't really wake up to being in the moment, being authentic. Well,
I think, a lot of times we're in our head, and what he taught me is the way to healing is through the feelings. We tend to go around all that. We don't like pain. As humans, we want pleasure. We don't want pain. And I think that night I realized that the breakthrough was through my feelings, through that frustration, through that anger. We just can't bypass this. That's why I talk about cleaning out my closets are a metaphor for life. You got to bring it all out. You got to look at each thing, and you got to grieve the loss if it's an emotional material possession that you're looking at, and then you can let it go. Sort of the same thing.
Well, as you're talking about cleaning your closets, let's talk about layers of clutter and what those mean.
Right. Well, layers, there's that initial layer of clutter in our life. Because I think it's a process to get rid of clutter. And there's the top surface would be tossing out keys that don't have locks to them anymore, and letting go of anything that is broken or can't be fixed, old newspapers. People keep magazines, that kind of stuff. That's the top layer. And then the middle layer might be more, you go into downsizing, where you get rid of 25 plastic containers and keep 8. I talk a lot about boundaries, setting boundaries around your things. You're going to keep 5 pair of pants and give away the rest. How many articles of clothing do we need? We eat the same 12 things, and we wear the same 12 outfits, basically. We have all this stuff. And then the deeper layers are, let's see, things that belong to our family, things that we have a strong emotional attachment to. and they may leave you feeling guilty if you think about passing them on. So those are the deeper layers. So I always suggest to people, just start with the easier things to let go of. Get motivated, and you'll begin to feel lighter. And then you'll there's an expression, motivation follows action. We have to get up off the sofa, and then we're motivated. We think we need to get motivated first. We got to take the action step. And then all of a sudden, maybe this is an experience for some of your listeners. They'll start to clean out a drawer, and before they know it, the whole cupboard's cleaned out. That kind of.
Mm-hmm. I know it's always interesting when you start digging through those drawers, or you're in the garage, or perhaps it's the closet, and you start pulling these things out. And you tend to ask yourself questions such as, well, maybe I might need this one of these days.
Oh, that's
well, you've had this for 3 or 4 or 10 years, and you haven't needed it yet. What makes you think you're going to need it eventually?
Well, let me tell you this. Someday is not a day of the week. That is the biggest resistance. Someday I might need it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the thinking is behind people that think that way?
I think it might be that they're afraid that they're going to make a mistake or it can't be replaced. I think maybe the big thing is they don't feel like it can be replaced.
Ah, that's interesting, especially if it's a screwdriver. I don't know. I can't help it because I keep thinking of this friend of ours, and apparently, according to my wife, he actually has a warehouse just full of stuff. I mean, this guy, you'll give him something and it never stays out of his hand, and he's always afraid of losing something. And I'm thinking to myself, you're packing all this stuff around. You got all this stuff in a warehouse. What do you think you by yourself are going to do with all this stuff?
Oh,
and you kind of wonder what's going on with this guy here. And I think he's in his 60s, and it's just interesting.
Well, I work with hoarders, and hoarders, very often people who keep stuff find it very insulating.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps them from, this is a generality. There are many reasons why people hoard, but I think it's usually triggered by a traumatic event or a tremendous loss, and having things makes them feel safe, and letting go of them feels like more loss.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've heard of people who live out of their cars because they can't get into their apartments, and there's this whole movement now, children of hoarders.
Okay.
And how they can't bring their friends home, and children who grow up in hoarding environments before the age of 10 are more likely to become hoarders themselves. And I read a story about a child who was taken by social services from his hoarding environment, and all his mother had to do was clean it up, and she never did, and he never returned home. Johns Hopkins is doing a whole thing about hoarding, and they're thinking of calling it a whole separate mental disorder. There is some ADD with hoarding, but it's very hard to treat. But Hopkins is doing a lot of studies now with it, especially with the TV shows about hoarding. It's really surfacing now.
Well, I know there's actually a documentary about that very subject that I had watched a few months back, and I'm thinking to myself, how do people live like this? For instance, there was a universal, I guess, call it a universal law, the vacuum. Okay, and this was something I had read as I was studying on a path of spiritual enlightenment, if you will, and talked about how as you give, you start to receive. And I thought, well, that's an interesting principle. Now, here's what was, I thought, really fascinating, and this was like about a 10 to 15-year period of my life. I would go and I'd give a couch away that I no longer would need. And I wouldn't hold garage sales. I would just give these things, whether I would donate them or somebody that I knew, I would say, I've got this couch I'm getting ready to get rid of. It's in pretty good shape. What do you think? And what was always amazing is I cleared that space. Somehow that space would get filled with something else. And I could never remember taking an action intentionally to do that. It would just happen. And I thought,
the
as I started...
abhors space.
What's that?
The universe abhors space.
I guess so, because I would get rid of stuff, but I would always find stuff replacing it, and I'm not a shopper by any means.
Right.
But it would just happen, and I thought, this is kind of incredible. This is a real law that really, in action, is very effective.
Wow. Congratulations. I think it's always great when you can give things away to people that you know. That's ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times we're giving things away. We don't know who they're going to, and we feel some emotion attached to it. But, yeah, that one in, one out guideline. I teach that to people, and I suggest they use that with their children too.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to buy something and you bring it in the house. What are you going to let go of? That way you're not, dealing with piles all the time. You maintain that sense of balance.
Mm-hmm. I know there was one time I remember I started getting a little more creative when it came to giving, because sometimes you would maybe say to someone, would you like this? And they'd take a look at it and say, no, not really. I thought, okay, well, this is kind of difficult. So what I would do is I would gift wrap it. Here, I just had something, nice little gift. And, obviously you're now obligated because you open the gift. Oh, thank you. You're not going to give it back.
Right.
And it was kind of fun that way.
Well, in our grandparents and our great-grandparents' generation, when you were given something, you never gave it away. That's why they end up with all that stuff.
Right.
But that was ingrained in those generations.
Mm-hmm. So do you think the idea that people are beginning to hoarding this day and age, is that sort of a social conditioning that's happened there?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's just another way to create a sense of safety. I think a lot of our behaviors are around what do we need to do to feel safe? And I think possessions, and we're also in a culture where there's so much waste, and the buy three or buy two, get one free, and these big box stores and things made in China, things are more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really hard for people to resist. When I work with people as a professional organizer, the thing I hear the most is, this was only $10. And my feeling is, well, if you don't like it, it's not, or you don't wear it, it's not worth it. But they feel like they need to rescue all this stuff that's, quote, inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a good deal. I have a friend who goes around and rescues things from yard sales because she's saying, how can they possibly get rid of this? And she ends up with all this stuff in her house, rescuing other people's memories.
Kind of makes you wonder what the little thinking is behind all that.
Well,
the idea that she's rescuing somebody else's memory.
Well, if she's rescuing other people's memories, she's probably rescuing in other ways in her life.
Oh, I see. I got you.
Yeah.
Now, what I found really interesting about, a book like yours, Making Space for Life, The Liberated Baby Boomer, is you don't really just talk about clearing out the clutter, as a direct thing, such as clearing the closet, getting rid of things you need. There's the other one where you're detoxifying your kitchen, for instance. But
right.
It kind of jumps around. It's sort of like on different thoughts and different things that you like to that you like to just express, like talking about fear, for instance, and what that is, and then you talk about phobias, then there's relationships.
Right.
And so what was it that your intention as far as piecing this together that you wanted the reader to really experience?
I think it was that I wanted them to see that it's kind of cleaning out the clutter in your life from the inside out. That there's all kinds of clutter. There's the internal and the external. And what happens when we clear out clutter, it leaves space for something new, better, and different to come into our life.
Now,
while it's a book, it has a lot of different subjects. That's probably the common theme.
Mm-hmm. I see.
There's something we can let go of that will liberate us.
Okay. Now, one of the things, too, is you have exercises people can utilize, especially when it comes time to the idea of purchasing that thing that may end up sitting on a shelf, and talk about some of the exercises you have in there for people to start implementing.
For releasing clutter?
Yes.
I would just start with setting boundaries and setting a criteria. So first, the criteria is I'm only going to keep something if it's beautiful, useful, and I love it, or it has an emotional attachment. That's my criteria. The listeners may have a different criteria, but write down things have to earn a right to be in our home because we have to maintain them, and they take up space, and they need to be dusted and watered and fixed. And so you only want to keep what aligns with your criteria. And then set boundaries. As I mentioned before, I'm going to keep 8 books on the subject of spirituality. I'm going to let go of the rest. You set the number. And just by doing that, you can make real progress. And do 15 minutes a day. If that doesn't work, just anyway, just set boundaries around a time limit. Inch by inch is a cinch, yard by yard is hard. It's better to do a little bit every day than a huge chunk once or twice a week.
I think that's also the case when it comes to people and debt. They'll take a look at a debt and say, I'd like to pay a big chunk of it off, but then it never goes away. And it's interesting how you always hear the common sense is just pay a little bit off at a time, but do it consistently, and you'll be amazed how quickly something like that goes away.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Fascinating stuff here. How have readers responded to your book?
They really like it. I think the fact that I have personal stories in there, people like stories. They can relate to the stories. It also includes some practical chapters, kind of the how-to. But I think they can relate to my stories, and they like that. They can be very thought-provoking. It's that kind of a book. And they can read as little or as much as they want. They can read one chapter. They can skip around. The only way that the only order in the book is that it's alphabetical. The chapters are alphabetical.
That I did notice.
Yeah, right. I didn't know how else to do it because it's just such an eclectic mix of different subjects, really with one theme, but a lot of different subjects.
Well, and that's one thing I noticed, because when you think about clutter, again, it can be direct and it can be metaphorical all at the same time. And one of the biggest clutters that I think a lot of us have as we approach midlife is clutter of the mind. And, when you tend to be cluttered in the mind, you certainly can't make clear decisions, especially good ones, because you'll tend to see reality through the veil of that clutter that you have in the first place. Share with us, if you can, how you work with that as far as your experience.
Well, that's a really good point. I suggest to people, because I also teach yoga, that to find something where you can empty the mind. Because we're always adding on as we move through our day. We're adding on and just feeling heavier and heavier. But find something that allows you to empty the mind and see things clearly. And then also I talk about trigger reactions. When you're triggered in the present moment, that's kind of a sign that the universe is telling you there's something that needs to be corrected in the present moment. And it's the body's way of purging clutter. So, yeah, the mental chatter I think we all struggle with. I really believe the spiritual work is learning how to live in the present moment. And so if you can find something like yoga or Tai Chi or something that helps you focus on the breath, because we find the present moment through the breath, it really makes a difference. Begin to incorporate something like that in your life. I noticed,
too, that, as we age especially, I remember feeling this way as I was approaching the age of 30. And I was talking with a girl one time about this, and she was about 27 years old, and we were kind of feeling that sense of frustration, like we're at this particular age and you felt like you should have more going on with your life, than you had. Apparently that's the way we felt. And what's really interesting is when you take a look at the old way of seeing things when it comes to especially American society, is the industrial age, had set up basically a social lifestyle where you got educated, you had the career, you have the children, then you built for retirement, saved for their college educations, which, okay, that's fine too. And, and then by a certain age that you retire, but you take a look at today, that was an old system that's totally outdated. It really doesn't work anymore because we've changed. It's, a global economy. It's now 24 hours. And we're not a manufacturing company anymore, or country, anymore, but yet we still think that same way. So you see people approaching 45, 50 years old, no savings, and really not much of a career. Maybe it's been kind of scattered here and there, and they think to themselves, boy, I think I've really blown it somewhere because I didn't follow that in-the-box way of living. And really, when you pay attention to what you've written here in the Liberated Baby Boomer, you begin to realize, wipe that slate clean, start with where you're at, and embrace the actual experience of who you are. You'll be amazed at the miracles that will lay before you.
Absolutely. Wow, beautifully said. I think we are evolving so fast, and I think change is happening so fast that the past is history, tomorrow's a mystery, and all we really have is today.
Mm-hmm.
All we have is today. I talk about financial security and financial serenity. Financial security is kind of an illusion. It's something that's changing all the time and can be lost, but the serenity is cultivated within. It can never be taken from us. Mm-hmm. So when I get anxious about the state of the economy or the stock market, I say to myself, just for today I have enough money, and that totally relaxes me again. Just for today I have enough, because I don't know about tomorrow. I'm still planning for tomorrow, but I don't get anxious about the stock market. I can't. It's always changing.
Oh, yeah. That's because it's a human element.
That's right. Exactly.
It's a perfect system until you add the humans, and then it just all hell breaks loose.
We just can't get out of our own way, can we?
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I actually had read a wonderful biography on the great investor Warren Buffett, and he says, don't play the market. This was a man that he built his financial foundation on investing in just good businesses, whereas people play the stock market. He said, his philosophy is playing the stock market is just like going to Las Vegas and gambling. It's volatile. It has, the human element to it. But he says, the way that I like to do things is tried and true. It's effective because you're dealing with people in one area kind of a thing. But we tend to do that. I think we tend to kind of take a look at things like that and go, well, we like that quick buck, those people that hit it big, or I wished I had invested in Microsoft, for instance.
Oh, I know.
You take a look at all the opportunities, even in a bad economy, that are available, and if you just wipe that away and took a look, you'd be really surprised about what's really in front of you as far as solutions.
Oh, absolutely. It's about looking at life as a glass half full instead of half empty, and waking up with gratitude. Doing that one thing can change your life, because when you're grateful, you feel abundant. If you're always complaining about what's not right in your life, you don't feel abundant. Right. So.
Or a better way to look at it too, rather than seeing the glass half full, just be thankful you have a glass in the first place.
There you go. And you don't have to look far to see that.
Now, Cater, is there a website people can find out more about you and your work?
Yes, Daniel. It's www.cater, Kater, Leatherman, LeaTherman.com.
Very good. The book is The Liberated Baby Boomer, Making Space for Life. Our guest today, Cater Leatherman. Cater, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program and helping us remove that clutter.
Thank you. Very much enjoyed the conversation.
You bet. Take care. We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. That is the number 50, beyond50radio.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and remember, live your day past happy.